Sammartino, the Italian-American wrestler, was the biggest face of the then WWF in the 1960s and 1970s. Bruno held the WWF Heavyweight Championship between May of 1963 and January of 1971. That reign is still the longest title reign in WWE history. He would hold the title again between December of 1973 until losing it to Billy Graham in April of 1977. His second title reign was another success despite him breaking his neck in a match against Stan Hansen in 1976. Of course, with there being such a large Italian-American population in the Northeast during that time period, Bruno was always going to be popular in that area, especially in New York and Pennsylvania. But him being the living legend of that period went beyond that.
He was huge from the time he started till the time he finished. If you knew a wrestling fan from New York or Philadelphia or Boston or Baltimore or Pittsburgh or, half of the top 10 biggest cities in the United States that you ever spoke to, whether a friend or family or somebody moved in town or whatever, all you heard about was Bruno Sammartino.
Larry Zbyszko, the man trained by Bruno Sammartino himself.
Well, Bruno was training me, and then there was a guy named Guido Mongol. But Bruno owned a little territory of Pittsburgh. So I got my first matches in Bruno's little territory, like in little high schools in the middle of nowhere. That would still have 3,000 people in them in those days. And that's how I kind of learned under the radar.
That real-life relationship would later make for a classic pro wrestling feud and storyline. The year is 1980, and Bob Backlund might be the WWF champion, but Bruno is still the top babyface in New York. However, since he had broken his neck, it had always been thought that Bruno would continue to have to keep fading into the background.
When Bruno broke his neck and couldn't do it, and then Billy Graham wound up with Backlund wound up with the belt, and the business was dying, I knew the people weren't ready yet for Bruno to be gone. He broke his neck, it wasn't planned. And I knew, I could feel it, and from everything I was taught, by Bruno and the other guys over the years, whoever talked Bruno into making one comeback would be the hottest thing in wrestling, because that's where all the publicity came out of it those days.
And Larry Zbyszko, who was tired of just being known as the protege of Bruno, challenges his teacher to a match in a classic teacher versus student match.
I was psyched. I knew my big break was coming, but I also knew that we had them at the point where they were going to be shocked. I didn't realize the shock would turn into such a degree of hate, but I knew that this was going to work. Because people's brain, they believed this was going to be a friendly, scientific, they never thought. It shocked them.
Zbyszko has a chance. Zbyszko striking Sammartino, and he really let him have it. Oh no, the blood pouring. Sammartino cut wide open. Again.
It didn't register for a while. It might have taken a couple days. People went into shock. They didn't expect it. It caught them so off guard. But as soon as they realized, I had death threats. Police departments called me, warned me, don't go to Little Italy, don't go to this town.
Zbyszko would become the most hated man in the Northeast for his brutal attack on Bruno that left him lying in the ring. And Bruno would be looking for revenge in a grudge match at Madison Square Garden a month later. Bruno feeling the ultimate betrayal by the man he trained, by the man he brought into the business.
Sometimes when you go into that ring and you meet someone, it's not always how much you even know. It's how much you have in your heart and what do you feel. And what I felt, I've gone through an awful lot of pain with this experience with Larry Zbyszko, an awful lot of pain. More pain than probably than anything, and I've had tremendous pains going back in my childhood in Europe with the war and everything else. I've known an awful lot of pain, and this certainly matches almost any pain that I've ever known. But that pain, Larry, has turned into bitterness, and I think I have just cause. Just cause. You have given me that just cause to be so bitter. And I am so bitter, Larry. I cannot tell you. You will never understand even what you've done to me. Because you have turned me into such a bitter man, and that bitterness is going to come out. And it's going to come out only when I meet you in the ring.
What does he have to be bitter about? He came on TV, tried to embarrass me, and it didn't work. Well, I want to confess to everybody. I have never felt more happy and more free in my entire life. I took myself, by myself, out of that ridiculous little box of a shadow that Bruno put me in for the last 8 years, and I broke it myself, and I raised myself above everybody, and now Larry Zbyszko is a front page name everywhere. And the only thing I lost was the support of Bruno Sammartino and you fans, and maybe you, and maybe some of the wrestlers. And you know what? It doesn't matter.
You could feel the garden shake. I mean, the beams and the bolt. And I think I remember the very beginning. I mean, you're talking about, nowadays when you can do anything and people just sit there. I mean, I think after a couple of minutes, Bruno gave me one arm drag, and 26,000 people went out of their seats.
Right. Sammartino about ready to lock up now with him. Nice arm drag.
This grudge match would live up to its name when Zbyszko keeps trying to run from Bruno, and Bruno ends up trying to choke Zbyszko.
Referee trying to pull Sammartino off.
The referee has disqualified Bruno Sammartino.
But the blood feud would continue, and it would culminate at one of the biggest wrestling events in the country at that point in time.
Vince Sr. did not believe no way in hell we're going to sell out Shea Stadium. In those days, the thought of wrestling selling out a stadium was unheard of.
But the Showdown at Shea event in the summer of 1980 did indeed sell out because of all of the heat and emotion in this feud. And despite what that lying egomaniac Hulk Hogan says, that his match versus Andre is the one that sold out the stadium, it didn't, because you have to remember, this was years before Hulkamania. Bruno owned New York at this point in time, and this feud was the culmination. And Zbyszko's mic work as a heel certainly built it up great.
Look at me hard and look at me long, and tell yourself, and really, really believe it, Bruno, that you are looking in a mirror. For Pete's sake, wake up. This is 1980. This isn't 1960 anymore. This is not before the broken elbows and the broken neck and the broken back. This is not before all the scars and the stitches. This is not before losing most of your hearing over the years through the cauliflower. This is 1980, Bruno. This is after the operation on the knees. This is after the wires and the bolts. This is after it all. You're not like me anymore. You're washed up. How plain do I have to say it? You're washed up and you're through. Now face the fact that this is the winner of your career.
Oh, and did I mention what better way to blow off a personal pro wrestling feud like this than inside of a steel cage?
It was so big. There was so much demand for tickets. The garden wasn't big enough.
Larry and Bruno would beat on each other in that cage, with Larry taking the brunt of it. And in the end, after beating up on Larry some more, Bruno would escape the cage to get the win. At the end of this feud, Larry may not have stuck around in the WWF for long after, but his career had been made from this classic pro wrestling feud and story. The teacher and his protege.
And Bruno actually told me to do this because Bruno never beat me. He walked out of the cage so I wouldn't get killed, but he never beat me in any shows. And he did that on purpose so I had an excuse to use and say, hey, Bruno never beat me, so.